Michael Hoytus, the beard. Haven't seen you for a
Yeah,
while.
yeah. I guess it's been a while because you didn't know I had a beard.
You're going into the cough drop business?
Me?
No, the Beard Brothers.
I'm not familiar with that reference.
Rudin Brothers cough drops. Look them up.
Sure will.
Well, welcome everyone. It's 1 minute after, but I'll stall for a couple more minutes. How many folks do we have? 48 people. It's always fun seeing the ratio we get of registrants to attendees for all of our both in-person meetings and our Zoom meetings. It's often a fairly consistent ratio. We often about 50% for things that are free. When you pay, that's the membership goes up a lot higher. But we had, I think, would you say, Sarah, 150, 152 people registered for the meeting. So we'll see 52, maybe we're about a third today. The sun's out, maybe there are better things to do than watch me talk. So why don't we get started? I will sort of start slowly. My name is Brit Vitalius. I'm the president of the Housing Alliance of Southern Maine, and I usually introduce these meetings. In this case, I'm going to be presenting. So unfortunately, you're going to have to hear me talk a lot today. This is going to be really a repeat of the presentation I gave at Shipyard a few weeks ago in person. And so if you missed that, you can tune in and really see the same thing here. The slides will be maybe a little easier to read because they're going to be full size on your screen. We can take some questions at the end or discussion or input. And in fact, if you have some questions or thoughts as we go through, it's okay with me if you either chime in or maybe raise your hand, and maybe Sarah will notice that your hand is up. I will probably be looking at my slides and might not notice. So we've got great group. We're up to 60. All right, we're getting there. We're getting there. Sarah, anything else I should remember? I guess I just want to remind everyone, we are a membership organization. So please make sure your membership is renewed. Please go to rhamaine.org. You should be able to log in. We've got a lot of great resources. This meeting is going to be recorded. You'll be able to watch this back, as well as I think all of our other Zoom Lunch and Learn. So there's getting to be quite a good library of resources there, plus other documents and helpful things for our members. I think some of you were on last week with, or maybe a couple weeks ago with Dan Bernier, talking about what's going on at the state level and some bills that are there. I know one that they're thinking about right now is a cap on pet fees that we are looking at and going to make sure we are weighing in on and pushing back on, among many other things. So why don't I start with my report, unless there's anything else I'm forgetting or anyone wants to share. Sam, anything else you're thinking about? All right, let's do this. So if you want to keep seeing me, I think it might go to speaker view, and you may get a little box up in the right-hand corner, but you may have to play with your settings so that you can mostly see the screen, and then also see who's up in the corner, or you can have a whole strip of a number of faces there so you can sort of play with your view. But I'm sharing my entire slide deck full screen, so hopefully that's what you're seeing. Again, my name is Brit Vitalius. I own a brokerage called Vitalius Real Estate Group. My team sells a lot of multifamilies in the Portland area in Southern Maine. We've been doing that for 20 years now. I can't believe it's been 20 years. We are honored this past year that my brokerage was actually recognized by the Boston Globe as being the #1 agency in Maine and #3 in New England. While I'm not sure exactly what that means, it sounds great. We'll take it. Sort of a fun thing to have. I figure out where my slides are. So I'm going to go through a few takeaways from what we were experiencing this year. And one was the price increases were slowing. They're still going up for the most part, but definitely not as quickly. And we're going to look at things town by town. Also, some really mixed signals in the market, seeing some different pressures play out, and some positive, but some slowing, and trying to reconcile and understand what those mean. An increase in unsold listings, which is a part of that mixed signal thing that I was just mentioning. We'll see a little more about that. Where are all the owner occupants? There were just seemed to be fewer, particularly in the Portland area, of those first-time buyers, as people who live in a 2-unit, live in a 3-unit, not as dominant in the market as they usually are. Persistently high interest rates obviously are a feature of the market, as well as a slowing of rental increases, which is a funny way to say it, but maybe rents are still going up, but not nearly as quickly. There's a lot of inventory coming online. I think many of us are starting to feel that in the market. And as the rents slow and it's less easy to rely on strong rents, that's going to affect the prices too, of course. So starting out with activity, this is the number of units sold in the 2 to 4 unit market in these different towns. So Portland is still below average. That green line that sticks up is 2021. That was really the peak of the market. It was just enough after sort of COVID had settled in. People were coming to Portland. People were sort of paying anything for anything in 2021. And the market's been really settling out since then. So Portland is still down. Saco and Bedford's still down below, what looks like kind of the average level. Lewiston Auburn is still below that too. Going to the smaller towns, we see Westbrook and Portland continuing the same trend. Only Topsom, Brunswick area is really about level. Now, those are such markets, I wouldn't overread into any of these. Sometimes it has to do with buyer pressure. Sometimes it has to do with the number of listings. So it's hard to know for sure which side is driving the equation here, but it's good to just get a gauge on activity generally. But the median price is really what's most interesting. This is across all multis with the data coming out of the MLS. So Portland was only up 2% over last year. That certainly is a slowing. Saco and Biddeford still pretty strong, up 9%. I mean, that's great growth, but not as much as Lewiston Auburn. Excuse me, at 13%. So still growth, but you can start to see it slowing. Portland the most, Saco and Biddeford putting on the brakes a little more. Lewiston Auburn still quite active. What's really helpful for perspective with this particular graph is seeing where these prices are relative to 2019. And looking down at the bottom of Portland here is we're up 61% from 2019. That's incredible in just 5 years. However, Saco and Biddeford is up basically 100%. The market's doubled in 5 years. And Lewiston Auburn is up 156%, which is completely bananas. Again, median pricing. The Lewiston Auburn numbers are so striking. I wanted to show a different graph of the same numbers. And what this shows is, can you see my cursor as I move it around the screen? So here, prices didn't move in Lewiston Auburn for a long time. 2017, 2018, 19, 20, even into 21, really no change at all. And then look at this line just go up over 2 years to 2024. And that's that 150% increase in value that we saw in Lewiston Auburn. Now it's probably starting to flatten. I would expect it to flatten. Who knows? But from 24 into the beginning of 25, this is not a lot of data. It's looking like it's flattening out. But for our members, if you owned here and you kept owning through here, congratulations. That's awesome. And now you can decide if you want to hold or get out while the getting's good. So towards the end of this year, really the second half of 2024, our listings in Portland were were slowing down some. And we are coming up to the election. We are coming up to, interest rates are staying up, and typically the end of the year does slow a little bit relative to the prior spring. So my office had pulled, I think, 4 listings off the market. People just weren't coming to see them. And these were sort of entry level, 2 units, 3 units, 4 units that seemed like they should be attracting those first time owner occupants. And there just weren't many people out there looking. We had some of the least expensive 3 units on the market in Portland, and there just didn't seem to be any buyers. So we pulled it off. And that got us wondering, is this a bigger trend? Like what's going on in the market overall? So we pulled the numbers out of the MLS, and listings that have expired, withdrawn, or been canceled between 2023 and 24 is 33 listings to 56. So the number of not sold listings in the market went up by 91%. Now, Saco and Biddeford, on the other hand, was down. So again, I can't really make sense is not uniform across the board. And Lewiston Auburn also increased the number of properties not sold. Now, again, I can't explain why that's the case in Lewiston Auburn, where they were seeing such great price appreciation that makes it seem like the demand is really high. So there are a lot of factors playing into this. Sellers not moving their price and pulling the property off the market, buyers leaving the market and they're just not out there. In Portland, it felt like there weren't as many buyers. Perhaps in Lewiston Auburn, maybe they're reaching for some price. Often when you see a curve like that, the next seller comes along and thinks their property is worth even 50% more. And if they don't get it, they say, oh, well, forget it. I'll just keep it. They feel like they're getting gypped because they didn't get their 150% increase. Anyway, I don't know what's going on in Lewiston Auburn, but these are some interesting trends to notice. So now I want to dive a little deeper into the Portland market. This is breaking 2 units, 3 units, and 4 units out separately. 2 units were still up, seemed pretty healthy, a 7% increase. A 2 unit is now over $700,000 in Portland. That's a lot of money. However, 3 units were down 3.5%. And the year before, they were down just a little bit. So there's that signal that, okay, maybe the market's slowing, maybe we're hitting sort of a price cap, maybe we're dealing with those high interest rates. Maybe we're dealing with these high prices where the owner occupants who want their starter multi still don't want to start at $700,000 or $800,000 as their first investment. 4 units, there are not that many of those in Portland, so I always caution to not over read into the 4 unit data, but a 2% increase also obviously indicates sort of a leveling off of the market in Portland. And I got curious about the difference in the market between sort of the entry level multis, the less expensive, the cheaper multis, maybe the ones that are a little rougher, and the ones that were over $1 million, because there is a strong market over $1 million in Portland right now. And in the residential market, we hear about buyers with cash, buyers who can pay for whatever they want. And I think that's also true in the multifamily market, particularly in Portland, that if it's a really nice property, there are still buyers out there. There's still buyers who are going to pay all the money for the right property. So I got curious, well, is that market going up? Is the $1 million plus market increasing? And it seems like it is not. Oh, and I came at it from a couple directions. The top number here is the median sale price. The middle number in the bar, the number of transactions over $1 million in that year. So boy, this really hovered very close to a median line of 1.2, 1.225, 250, and then the lowest is 1.150. So we're within $50,000, $85,000 of a very consistent median price here over $1 million. So it does not seem like the market is changing dramatically. Likewise, double check the price per square foot, and we're really seeing the same thing, that the price per square foot of the $1 million plus market in Portland is not changing substantially. I think that resonates with my experience. It does feel like this is actually the strongest part of the market, that if the property is well located, in great condition, you can still kind of get all the money, but all the money doesn't mean it's substantially more than it was a couple of years ago. Finally, well, we've got the last couple of slides in Portland. So this is the commercial market in Portland. This is 5+. These are commercially financed. These are properties that tend to sell more on a cap rate, bid for the income. Very few owner occupants playing in this market. With rent control having passed in Portland in 2020, and then again in 2022, it's no surprise to see the decline in value in this market, where the median price per unit is down from its peak a couple of years ago, a 185 a unit, down to 156 a unit this year. Now, the price per square foot is doing a similar thing. The graph looks pretty similar. It's technically up a little bit from the prior year. Again, it's hard to overread into any of this on a year-to-year basis because there just aren't that many transactions in this market. But I think it shows that the impact of rent control on the market, and certainly a slowing the commercial market and a decrease in values. Now, this is a chart that lists out many of the commercial sales, not all, but a number that we did a study on. And so we redid the price per square foot and price per unit here. These numbers are going to be a little different than the last slide because it's a little different data set. It's a smaller data set, but they're going to show that they're pretty similar. And what's here, we were trying to look at the cap rate, and I want to thank Chris Sullivan for putting this together from our office. This is publicly available information, so don't rely too much on the exact specifics of each number. We didn't go and recheck all the pro formas here, but it gives you a pretty good sense that on a cap rate basis, that there were sales that you would expect where the cap rate was 7 or higher, and the majority fell into that category: 7.11, 8.5, 7.8, 7.5, 7.59, sorry, 8.59, 8. That's where we'd expect. What's surprising is that there were 3 sales below 6, 5.5, 5.5, and let's call it 5%. That's surprising in this rent-controlled market, and where interest rates are, let's say 7%, that we're seeing sales close to a 5 cap. We don't have the details on each one of these individual sales, but I'm sure these properties are nice. I mean, I know these properties were nice. And there's still a need for 1031, simply a place to park money, depreciating asset as a tax write-off. I think all those things still exist. And these sales prove that there is still a market to just place money, and Portland is seen as a safe haven and probably still a good long-term investment despite the challenges of rent control. So this is an anecdotal situation of a couple sales I wanted to relate, really to give you a flavor of the confusion that we were feeling as brokers, Portland brokers, in the market in Portland. The property on the left, 22 Vesper Street, was listed, we listed for 1.65 and sold for 1.6. Great. We had a number of folks looking at it. I think we only had one offer. It was a very nice property. The whole back half had been completely rebuilt. There was nice laundry in each unit. There were rooms off the back with glass all around and decks and views. It was lovely. So right after that sale, we listed 29 Kellogg Street and listed at 1.275, considerably less than 22 Vesper Street. It's also a nice 3-decker, but not as nice. And I don't believe it had decks, maybe some peaks of the water, not quite as affluent a street, even though it's only a couple blocks away. And figured, okay, that's a reasonable adjustment. If Vesper sold for 1.6, Kellogg certainly should sell for 1.275. Well, it didn't sell. I think it was under contract a couple times, fell out a couple times. We wound up with that price reduced to as low as 1.125, and it never sold, and we pulled it off the market. As a broker, these two side by side are a real head scratcher. Is the market 1.6 for a 3-unit? Okay, what if your 3 unit's not quite as nice? Well, 1.2 seems like it should be a reasonable adjustment. It's $400,000 less, and yet it didn't sell. And it just didn't feel like there were many buyers. There just wasn't that sort of that buyer pressure in the market. And that was right around the time we started really scratching our head about what was going on in Portland, particularly. So stopping on Portland, let's move to Lewiston, Auburn. A lot of activity there. This is going to be just a little more of a breakdown in the numbers that we saw earlier. 2 units, 3 units, and 4 units. 2 units up 10%, 3 units up 17.5%, 4 units up 7.5%. So still a very strong market. I think there's a couple reasons I'm going to speculate about that. One is it's just a more accessible price point. If a 2 unit is 335 in Lewiston, Auburn, and it's over 700,000 in Portland, it's a lot more comfortable for that first-time buyer and comfortable and accessible for that first-time buyer to get into a $335,000 multi than a $700,000 multi. So that's pretty simple. Also, I think Lewiston Auburn still has a lot of energy believing that there's upside, that there was still a lot of growth to go there in terms of rent increases, buildings that can be fixed up. There's still energy going there where a lot of that has already happened in Portland. So even without rent control in Portland, a lot of these buildings have already been fixed up. The rents have already increased, and the perception of a marginal increase still available may be less in Portland than it is in some of the other communities. That's really just my speculation about the reasons why Lewiston Auburn is driving so much more. The Lewiston Auburn commercial market looks just like the residential. It just keeps going up. The price per unit is up 11%. Price per square foot is up 4%. It feels to me like investors who want to own residential investments, multifamily buildings, and are frustrated with Portland are looking for other opportunities. And so Saco and Biddeford, Lewiston, Auburn, Bath, Brunswick are all opportunities where investors are going. I can tell you when I started this 20 years ago, investors I knew tended to own either in Portland or in Lewiston, Auburn. And now we see much more of a mix between the different towns, that Southern Maine is seen as an extension of sort of all the same market. And for investors who want to be aggressive and want to be active, they're feeling forced to move outside of Portland and look for other opportunities. So that probably is also a dynamic driving this market. Just to give a sense of how high values can go in Lewiston, here are a couple sales we did up there. This 47 Central is over near Bates. Great area, beautiful building. We listed it for $525. It sold for $505. I'm telling you, $500,000 for a 3-unit in Lewiston is still a lot of money. I don't think I thought I'd live to see the day. Likewise, another sale we did over on Lisbon Street. This is just a busy street, had parking. It's brick. It was a perfectly nice building. Listed for $499, sold for $515. Another example of how active and excited people are to buy something in Lewiston, and certainly when it's of quality, the price goes up even more, as these two sales show. So finally, we're going to drop down to Saco Biddeford. Saco Biddeford's looking a little more like Portland. 2 units are up, but not as much. 3 units are basically flat. 4 units are up. It's kind of a wash. It feels like it's leveling off. And the surprising thing to me is the price per unit and the price per square foot of the commercial multis in Saco and Biddeford are down. And I can't really explain that. I don't know why the residential side is up, the commercial side's down. I think I looked it up last night. There's not a ton of sales in this space, that at least in the MLS. I'm sure there are other sales that are not recorded there. But there's only like 7 or 8 transactions. So again, I wouldn't overread into any of these numbers. We're looking for general trends. Any couple sales could pull these numbers down a bit, but it's still reflecting the trend that Saco and Biddeford is likely slowing in terms of market appreciation and value. Click. This is my last real slide with information. These are a couple sample sales that we did down in Saco and Biddeford last year. 20 Chapel Street sold for $675. It's 4 units. It was big, a lot of bedrooms, some parking. But this was also a pretty big gangly building and some deferred maintenance, one that I would have, been a little nervous about investing in and all the costs. And we had a lot of showings, multiple offers, and it was listed for $635 and sold for $675. So again, still a very active market, a 4-unit down in Biddeford. The 6-unit on Store Street sold early Last year, you can see the snow from last winter there, a 6 unit for 1.1. And that's a lot of money. I think it was a pretty low cap rate. It's a nice property, had a big garage in the back, but that is still a relatively new reality for us all to be absorbing that a 6 unit could be selling for almost 200,000 a unit down in the Saco Biddeford area. I think these are primarily one-bedroom units. They're big one-bedroom units, but they were one-bedroom units. And so the rents were good, but they were not $2,500 per month per unit there by any stretch. So I end with my forecast, and I'll tell you, I don't have a huge forecast this year. The sense of slowing is real. I think we're trying to respond to that. As we are listing properties, we are trying to not shoot the moon and yet be aware of the fact that there are still buyers out there. There are still buyers very active in the markets outside of Portland. And there's certainly buyers in Portland for the nice properties. Don't keep raising the prices, but if properties are attractive in a good location, have the right ingredients, they're still selling. There's still activity. Inventory is also still low in all these communities. And I think that keeps this tension. The market's trying to slow down on the one hand, and yet there's no inventory. So if you are a buyer, there's still not a lot to choose from. And that creates a strange tension in the market of who's in control. Is it the sellers because there's low inventory, or is it the buyers because there aren't as many buyers, because these buyers are now borrowing at 7%? It's really hard to know how all that's going to play out this year. I think this year is probably going to look a little like last year in terms of activity, but not the 20% growth that we were seeing year over year. There's hope for lowering interest rates. I think I just saw something showing that interest rates were down about, I'm going to take off screen share here. We're down about, had gone down for 7 weeks in a row. And that's interesting. I think the other factor is inventory, that the multifamily market has been very strong on the sales side because the inventory for rentals has been so restricted. And all this stuff we hear about the housing crisis benefits the value of multifamily homes. That when there's nothing out there to buy or to rent, that the rents keep going up. Well, there's still limited supply, but there is a lot more inventory coming online in the rental market. I was on a panel at Merida giving this presentation with John LaLiberty, who is the CEO of Reveler, which is the development arm of Port Properties. And they're bringing on a lot of units, hundreds of units in Portland. They're bringing on units down in Biddeford. The mills down in Biddeford are bringing a lot of inventory to the market. The base up in Brunswick is bringing on a lot of units. So I've heard anecdotes from all of you in the landlord association asking me, hey, Britt, I've got this 2-bedroom unit. It's been vacant for 2 months this winter. What gives? And I've heard that now for the last 2 winters. So there is this sense that the rental market is still good, but it's not what we were getting used to, which was just year after year, sort of these increases that you could rely on. That when we would put a rental ad out, we had to get 20 or 50 inquiries. Well, that was fun as a landlord, but it's not healthy as a market, and it may not be a reality for much longer. And so we may be returning to some sort of reasonable equilibrium or closer to equilibrium between rental units available, rental demand, so that we don't want to have a vacancy. We're not happy to just let a tenant go because when it turns over, you can get 20% more. Maybe at least temporarily, those days are over, or at least not as much pressure as there was. So I think that's something that really plays into values. And frankly, it's in the buyer's minds as they're coming in and going to borrow at 7% to buy their multi. And they're thinking, how strong is this rental market? How easily am I going to be able to fill these? What's the rent really going to be when I have a vacancy? That all seems to be entering the psychology of the buyer market now. That's most of what I had to share. So I will stop there and pause. Any other questions or comments? I'm happy to hear your input on any of these things. A lot of this is speculation on my part. We've got data and then try and paint in why we think things are happening. But you guys are on the ground too, living this just like I am.
I'm actually think I'm going to be listing mine uh, next month.
Give me a call.
I'm kind of in cahoots with Portside, but
Yeah.
I'd still talk to you if you want to talk to me. But
Yeah. No, this is not a sales pitch.
What town, Michael? What
Portland,
town is your unit that you're going to list?
Portland. It's a
Yeah,
it's
I
a three
think,
unit.
yeah, I think, personally, I think it's a reasonable time to think about selling, frankly, for anyone. And I don't say this as a broker. I say when you look at that slope of increase in value, and I showed how dramatic it was in Lewiston, Auburn, but frankly in Portland too. It started in 2012. You guys have heard me say this. It started in 2012 and really ramped up to 2019. It started to level off in 19, and then COVID happened. Apparently, today is the fifth anniversary of the first reported case of COVID in Maine. Happy fifth. And that just shot values through the roof again. Portland was up another 60 some percent, and all just in the last 5 years. So, what I say to our clients and people thinking about it is if you want to keep owning, just keep owning. But if you are looking for an off ramp, there are times to get an off ramp. And I guess the other point I would make with that is don't feel too beat up if you have to come down on the price a little bit from what you thought. That keep the context in view. That if you're up 50% from 5 years ago instead of 60%, hopefully you can call it a win and still feel good about yourself and good about the investment because that's a pretty incredible return by any metric anywhere. And I think if the market is adjusting, if the buyers are slowing down, if maybe the price is kind of overshot and are settling back down a little bit, just go make your deal and move on. And I have that perspective just as a broker, sort of always negotiating with my own sellers who always want more, as we all should when we're selling, but also wanting to feel good that, what, this price is, boy, it's pretty darn good. 2 units in Portland were 250,000 for a long time, then maybe they hit 350, and now suddenly they're over 700. Like, call it a win. Ray.
Hey, Brit, thanks for the presentation. A follow-up question, would a appropriate strategy be if you do have like a 3, 4, 5, 6 unit, property to kind of, I know we kind of condoize it, but would it be appropriate to maybe write up some of the appreciation, sell them off as little drips and pieces of a project versus all at once?
So are you talking about Portland specifically or just
Yeah,
generally?
Portland
Yeah,
specifically.
so in Portland, we have started trying to explore other ways. Thanks for the question, Ray, and thanks for being on today. Um, Trying to explore other ways of extracting value where rent control has clearly blocked a lot of the value add that drove prices in Portland for a long time, that we could keep our rents lower, take care of our, oh, we've reached our recording limit, just said. Keep our rents lower, but then the next buyer could do the value add. Now with the rent control, there's not a lot of value add in terms of rents because you're kind of stuck. So people look um, to maybe condoization as a way to get out. The challenges in Portland is rent control 2.0 that passed in 2022 added a fee for condoization of rental units. So when it first passed, it was $25,000 per unit that you condoed. That sucked, but I then learned only a few months ago it got worse, and there's actually some sort of escalator index in there. And I haven't read the details of how it works, but I can tell you today in Portland, if you want to turn your 6 unit into 6 condos, you'll pay $42,500 per unit to condo it. So the DSA has really tried to block all the exits for getting value out of our properties, both with rent control and this condo fee that we now have to pay. As an agency, we've started exploring some other creative solutions, and I'll share one here if you all promise not to tell anyone. all 74 of you. Um, there is a way to condo where you don't, condo just means creating separate ownership structure. And when people hear the word condo, they assume it means separate individual residential units. And it doesn't have to mean that. They're commercial condos. So some of the stores you go to, the storefronts are a condo within the larger building. Likewise, you could take something like an 8 unit with two front doors that might have 4 units on one side and 4 units on the other and turn it into two condos, each condo containing 4 units. Does that make sense? That can happen. We've helped clients through that. It's tricky. The city of Portland at the moment does not see that as a typical condo conversion that triggers the condo ordinance or the fees because they still exist as apartment buildings. They're apartment buildings under a different structure because now there's this condo wrapper around it, but it's still a 4 unit and it's still a 4 unit. The financing gets tougher, the insurance gets tougher. We've muscled our way through a couple of these and figured out how to do it. The reason to consider that, as Ray was sort of highlighting, is how can we get the value out of our properties? Because the NOI, the income might be killing you. The income, maybe you kept your rents low, and so when it comes time to sell, your value is based on the generous rents that you kept low for your tenants, but now are impacting your value when you go to sell. One workaround is if you can turn it into a couple 2 units, a couple 3 units, a couple 4 units, now you can sell into that owner occupant market. Someone can buy it, not move in, not be encumbered by rent control because now they're in an owner occupied 2, 3, or 4 unit building. It's a bit of a trick. I'm not saying everyone go try it. We hit some challenges through the process, but it's the type of creative thinking that we're trying to explore in Portland. Sam.
I want to take a minute or less just to talk about politics, local politics. When you get rent control and when prices drop for multis, the effect is to drop the tax base for multis. And that means if residential owners want to keep their taxes the same, there's a higher burden on residential owners. Or if they want to keep their bill the same, they have to cut the budget. How about that? No one, except everyone on this podcast, could have predicted that in 2020.
Thanks, Sam.
Hey, Brett,
Yeah, Dave.
I got a 6 unit. What is your sense on the inventory for 6 units? And also, should I use some of the information and guidelines that you're giving on the multi-unit, the 3 to 5, like a 6 unit, or do you see any separation?
It's really a case by case. Some buildings seem to logically lay out in a way that when you look at it, you say, yes, I can sell this as two separate entities. The buildings are certainly the easiest if there's two front doors with a dividing wall.
Yeah,
Those lay out very logically.
I'm mean in general, not going to the condo concept that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem. But just relative to inventory out there for 6 units and the information you put on there, is you're feeling limited as well?
The inventory is always low in Portland and is low right now, and it's very low. It's always very low for 5 units and up in Portland. So there will be buyers looking for 6 units for your 6 unit. You will get looks, and it may even sell for more than you might think it should based on a cap rate basis because there are just not many in the city. So yes, you've got a limited commodity in that sense, and that's always the positive. So while the rent control is sort of pushing down, the limited number of those types of buildings is totally in your favor, Dave.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Britt, sorry, it's Ray again. Just for Dave's example for the 6 units, hypothetically, would it make sense to, hey, let's sell 1 unit this year and then sell two the following year, or if you condoize it, so to speak, just like one at a time, could you write up the appreciation a little bit to kind of maximize that? Granted, I understand if you have to lose money of the condo conversion fee, But just generally speaking, from a philosophy perspective, would that be an approach to maximize value if the numbers worked out?
Um, I mean, maybe, I'm not sure I totally understand the hypothetical. Like if you made six condos and then sell one and then sell a second.
Yeah, like because assuming that the values appreciate over time,
Hmm.
where it's like following year, well, you're gonna get a 5% price increase per square foot because of just general natural appreciation,
Hmm.
versus selling everything at one time. I just didn't know if kind of the step curve of going up in time to get catch that appreciation in Portland, if that
So I
would
think
be.
I think it's possible to get, so I think it's a good question and somebody will do that and it will work out for them. So I think um, it's a good thought experiment and maybe a good strategy. I guess I would remind everyone that a couple things when you do a condo conversion. You are often, I believe, check with your accountant, but you are taxed as a more active investor. So it's not taxed as a passive gain, but it may flip you over into your income tax bracket because you're doing something more active than just sitting there watching your 6 unit appreciate in value. So that's one factor. The other is once you flip it into condos, then they're all reassessed as condos. So maybe your taxes are $10,000 for your 6 unit now, but they might become $6,000 for each of the condos you own. And so if you don't just get rid of them, yes, you own the same rentals with the same income, but now because they're five condos, your taxes just went through the roof. So maybe there's some other way to matriculate it in so that they're not all taxed as condos. But again, you're just getting to a pretty sophisticated level of doing this. And I guess I just had this conversation with someone earlier today who's probably going to sell their building. Just as a multi, we did a deep analysis as its viability as condos. It's doable, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of risk. There's tenants there. Are you kicking them out? Are you renovating it while they're there? Then your tax hit changes. The market could change during this time. So it's just risk. I think for me, I've sold one of my buildings in Portland. I'm going to sell another in Portland. I'm just frustrated. And I think it's the same thing we hear from a lot of landlords in Portland. We take good care of our tenants. We like being owners and to be treated like the villain. And with all the restrictions, you guys have heard me say I had someone in my building who had been there for a long time, passed away finally. His sister thanked me for letting him stay in the building. He was an old, long Portlander, a longshoreman who had been injured. I let him stay there until, his last days. And then when he passed away, I was screwed. It took $40,000 to renovate the unit. I couldn't raise the rents. So, that's what we get in Portland nowadays. So, and that's just frustrating. But people are making it work.
Hi, Brit, it's Michelle. Um, could you comment on what you've seen as far as investors selling in Portland, say a 3 or 4 multi-unit? And is there enough inventory to do a 1031? And other investors doing 1031s or taking the tax hit? Could you comment on that?
That's a great question. Folks are doing 1031s, all kinds of creative 1031s. We're going to do another talk in our group about that. Yeah, most people are like trying to get out of Portland, maybe as an example. There is still inventory. I think just being patient, connecting with a broker who knows the other markets and can help manage timing, I think is a big piece because your clock starts ticking the day you sell. So you really want to make sure that you can delay your own sale as long as possible, and not start the clock ticking. Other folks are looking into Delaware statutory trusts and other vehicles that aren't, we've got clients who sell and go buy themselves a condo down in Florida. There's a lot of ways to move out of one kind of asset and into another. And so we can have that conversation. I think coming to this group, coming to in-person meetings and talking to people and hearing what they've done is part of what this group's about. So I don't know if that's an answer or not.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
This is Karen Bischoff, and I have kind of a strange question. I have a three-family in Portland. We had a fire the end of January, and the one unit is totally gutted, one's partially gutted, and the third one we're not sure yet because we haven't gotten through the walls and that kind of thing. So we're contemplating, do we keep it a three-family? Do we convert it to a two-family? Tear the thing down and make it a single family? So, I mean, there's pluses and minuses on either side. What would you, or is this totally off topic?
Well, I don't want to go too deep because we've got 64 people who are not in 63 other people who are not in this situation. But I think it's a good hypothetical question. I think it's probably have someone like me or your favorite broker out and just look at it and look at the market. What makes sense, what you're up to tear it down and build a new house still comes with a lot of headaches and management and code and the city and all that. So, a lot of these situations, the question is like, what are you up for? Like, and how much more is it going to be worth? If you liked owning your 3-unit, the best thing that can happen, I'm going to say this quote, and no one better quote me out of context. The best thing that can happen to your building is to have a fire because they're all old and have old wiring and old plumbing. And the buildings we go in that have had a fire, you have an old building, but inside it's like you have a new building. So that can actually be, if now you're in this situation, it can be a good place to get to have a 3-unit that's basically like a brand new building in terms of the systems, the wiring, the windows, the sheetrock, all that stuff. So I would start there and say, hey, this is a good situation. 3 units are still great. You can still get 3 rents out of it. And just keep doing that. So I would start there, and then you could do a deeper dive analysis and say, but would a 2-unit be worth that much more? Would a single family be worth that much more? Probably not, but that would be the next analysis to do. But without seeing the space and location, it's hard to just say yes or no.
Okay, thank you. I know it's kind of an odd. Appreciate it.
Well, good luck. Sorry for the fire. That's terrifying. That's the thing that most makes me nervous about being a multi-unit owner is when I see that fire truck go by. I'm like, I hope they're not going to my building. And it's just terrifying.
Thank you.
Well, why don't we wrap it up there? I want to loop back to something that Sam Sherry was talking about, which is the change that may happen in Portland because of rent control. So now I'm going to dial back to the political a little bit. The change in value for multis, that if multis, while they haven't gone down in value, it is very likely that they have not increased in value at the same rate as single family homes. And when a reassessment is done by the city for tax purposes, the purpose of that reassessment is to recalibrate the relative values between the different types of properties so that everyone is paying their fair share relative to the value of their property and others. So Portland is going through that process right now. We want to make sure the city of Portland knows that multi-unit values are impacted so that our taxes are as low as possible. We also want to make sure that single-family homeowners, many of whom voted for rent control, understand that part of the cost of rent control is not just to us, but it's also to them as single-family homeowners because their taxes are going to go up because our taxes are going down. And that's just how it works. So Sarah McKee, our brave director here for the Rental Housing Alliance, wears 2 hats. And she also works for the Greater Portland Board of Realtors on their legislative and advocacy committee. And through that committee, applied to the National Association of Realtors for a $25,000 grant to look at this issue and to hire an economist to do an analysis of this and project what the impact might be on property taxes for single-family homeowners in Portland due to rent control. So we are embarking on that work right now, but we want to make sure that this information and projections are getting out into the Portland community right at a time when Portland residents are concerned about their taxes going up. And that it's not coming from us, it's coming from an economist who does a study and says, look, the impact to homeowners could be X. And we don't know what the results are going to be. Maybe they're not very dramatic, but we want to make sure we look at it because all our arguments during rent control, which we all made a lot, and I made publicly a lot about the cost to us and our buildings over time and all that, did not land. People did not seem to care, and we took a beating the last few rent control campaigns. But maybe they will care if it affects them and their property taxes. So we will hope that maybe there's some resonance with this argument. But first, we're going to do the work. But I want to make you all aware that that grant was issued and that our organization has been engaged to help sort of administer the reporting and the economist, and then what we do with that and how we get the word out. So this is a great example of our association working with the Realtor Association, sort of hand in hand, pulling on the same oar, going in the same direction. Sarah or Aaron, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
No, but I just would say that the National Association of Realtors was really impressed by the work that we're doing in Portland. And they see, this is an example that other cities could do depending on what our findings are. So we're really excited and looking forward to it.
Yeah. Thanks, Aaron. Aaron is this year's president of the Greater Portland Board of Realtors and was instrumental in this with Sarah. And Sarah did a great job getting up in front of the whole committee of the National Association of Realtors and making this presentation for this grant. And as Aaron just said, we were about 100 times more interesting and innovative than the other two applicants, one of which was the value of using a realtor. That was the other applicant. Ours was, what's the impact, what's the cost of rent control on single family home values? So I think we're engaged, we're doing our best, and we're going to keep trying to fight for good housing in our communities and making sure that the folks and the voters in our communities are educated, because I think they're making the wrong decisions, but not because they're bad people. Just I think they don't have all the information. They're not down in the trenches like we are every day.
Britt, Amy asked in the chat when it'll be ready. Do you have a timeline on when you think it'll be done?
I think hopefully in the next couple of months. We got to get them some data, but we want to have it coming out this spring while the reval is happening in Portland, so that we're part of the media cycle on all this. Thanks. Anything else, Sarah? All right. Thank you all so much for being here and for your attention. I greatly appreciate it. Hopefully something here was helpful. We'll make my slides available online, and we'll see you at our next meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.